City Club is where we bring civic-minded people together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm Greg McPherson, President-elect of City Club. I would like to welcome our members and guests, those of you joining us today at the Sentinel Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB Radio or watching on Portland Community Media. The generous support of Friday Forum's sponsors and media partners assure our ability to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank our media partner, Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are Bank of the Cascades, Family Care Health Plans, Legacy Health, Russell Fellow Properties, The Standard, and Stoll Reeves. We are grateful for their generous commitment to City Club's mission. Please join me in a round of applause for all of them. We have a number of civic scholars from David Douglas High School in the audience today. Civic Scholars is City Club's initiative to engage high school students more deeply in public issues, bringing civic education out of the classroom and into the community. This morning, prior to the forum, they had their own Q&A with today's panelists. Students, please stand if you are able. Welcome to Friday Forum. At next week's Friday Forum, we will hear from a national expert on the problem of health illiteracy, the inability of many in the public to understand the health issues we face. Also, next Tuesday evening, March 3, we're holding two great City Club events. Our regular civic drinks gathering will be from 5 to 7 at Spirit of 77 on MLK Boulevard. Then from 6 to 8 at Hopwood's Brewery on Southeast Powell, we will discuss Oregon benefit companies, which consider impacts on people and the planet, as well as making a profit. You can learn more about these and other City Club events and purchase tickets and become a member on our website at pdxcityclub.org. As always, we will be live tweeting today's program. You can follow along and join the conversation using the hashtag #PDXCityClub. At the end of our program today, Salome Chimuku will facilitate a Q&A session. City Club members may come to the microphone to ask a question of our panelists during that session. Anyone in the audience may ask a question by writing it on one of the index cards you'll find on the center of your table and holding it up so City Club staff can collect it during the forum or the Q&A session. And now for today's program. Tragic events across the country have focused greater attention on police-community relations. Last year, the Portland Police Bureau reached a court-approved settlement with the U.S. Department of Justice for reform of how the Bureau engages with the mentally ill. Portland Mayor Charlie Hales, who oversees the Police Bureau, recently appointed a new chief, Larry O'Day. Chief O'Day, who is responsible for implementing the settlement, is a 28-year veteran of the Police Bureau. He has held a succession of leadership positions there and has volunteered with a number of community organizations, including the Board of Habitat for Humanity. First, we will hear from Chief O'Day and then from our other panelists. Salome Chimuku is Public Policy Director at the Center for Intercultural Organizing, which is leading a coalition effort to change state policy around police profiling. Joanne Hardesty is a longtime City Club member who served 3 terms in the Oregon legislature. She is the recently elected president of the Portland chapter of the NAACP and serves on the steering committee of the Albina Ministerial Alliance Coalition for Justice and Police Reform. Tony Hobson, Jr. is founder of Self-Enhancement, Inc., a nonprofit organization that supports at-risk urban youth. Please welcome Chief O'Day and our other panelists.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be here today, and I want to thank you for your invitation to today's event. As your new chief, it's important to me that we get to know each other, so I want to tell you a little bit about myself, both personally and professionally. I'm not from Oregon. I was actually born in New York, I've lived all over the country. I've lived in Alaska and Maryland, Kansas, Missouri, Georgia, and most recently from the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area. But I've been in Oregon for the last 31 years. I'm married, and my wife and I are celebrating 34 years together. We have a 24-year-old son, and all of us are Portland State University graduates. I also went to Portland Community College before being hired by the Police Bureau. And as an aside, I was just notified that I'm receiving one of their Diamond Award alumni for this year, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Prior to working for the Police Bureau, I was a restaurant manager, and I've been a reserve police officer in Fairfax County, Virginia, and a reserve deputy sheriff in Clackamas County, Oregon. On Saturdays, I help build houses for Habitat for Humanity, and I'm on the board of directors as well, and I'm currently finishing up my 13th house. I've worked in the chief's office for the last 3 chiefs. I've served as both the assistant chief of the services branch and the assistant chief of the operations branch, and I'm beginning my 29th year with the Police Bureau. I've worked in the past throughout the Bureau. I've been a member of our street crimes unit. I was part of the original gang enforcement team when that formed in 1987. I've been a part of our special emergency reaction team and our traffic division. I've also been a crowd control incident commander and a critical incident commander for the Police Bureau. And I was a part of the Community and Police Relations Committee for 5 years, and I also helped form the Slavic Advisory Committee. This is a transformative time for our country and for my profession. Our country is still struggling with how race impacts all of our major institutions, such as education, employment, health care, and all parts of the criminal justice system, to include the police. It's my belief that government needs to get this right first, and that the police profession needs to be at the front of the line in government getting this right due to our tremendous responsibility and the authority that we have. What can the police do differently, and where am I taking the Police Bureau? I want you to picture a 3-legged stool, and the 3 legs of that strategy are internal efforts, diversifying the Police Bureau and the leadership within the Police Bureau, and focusing on a relationship-based philosophy of policing. I'm going to go talk about these 3 legs in a little bit of detail for you. So starting off with internal efforts. You know, this heading captures all of the substantial internal changes around policy revision and training that we are doing. The Police Bureau is committed to improving our knowledge and our action around equity. So far, we have developed equity training that we have done for the Chief's Office, for our command staff, and for our frontline sergeants. We now need to continue that effort for our officers as well. We're also building an equity and diversity strategic plan for the Police Bureau. Internal efforts includes the substantial changes in how we do our advanced academy and our in-service training, and the influence that the Training and Advisory Council has helped us with. It includes our substantial policy changes around such critical issues as use of force, taser, de-escalation, and how we do force investigations. We now have a brand new training facility. For the first time ever, the Portland Police Bureau can holistically train all of its disciplines in one location, creating the most realistic and appropriate training to date. It includes the substantial work that we have been doing and still have to do around the Department of Justice settlement agreement. It includes the hiring of an equity and diversity program manager who works directly for me and has the responsibility and the authority to go anywhere in the Police Bureau and advise me on changes that I need to make to ensure that we are inclusive and equitable. This kind of position is unheard of in a police department, but I believe so critical. Also included in our internal efforts is the hiring of an analyst who will be entirely dedicated to looking at our stops data. My profession tends to want to justify a disparity in stops data due to many socioeconomic issues. We're going to look much deeper. This analyst is going to have the background to understand some of the nuances behind the data, such as criminal justice inequities, institutional racism, implicit bias, and then together with the Equity and Diversity Program Manager, share that information as we come together as a community to discuss and act on it. Other internal efforts include our formation of a behavioral health unit so that we may better serve people in crisis. Behavioral health specialists ride with police officers, and those partnerships help ensure the most appropriate response to people in crisis. Additionally, we have trained approximately 60 officers in enhanced crisis intervention training. We are also participating in and highly supportive of the efforts involved in the developing of a psychiatric emergency drop-off facility and of a model where somebody other than police transport people in need of behavioral health care. Makes no sense to me to have police officers put handcuffs on somebody, place them in the back of a caged car, and transport them somewhere to get medical help. We're conducting sworn Bureau member written evaluations for the first time in my career. This will help measure many categories of performance, such as community engagement. These evaluations were also developed with community input. The Police Bureau now drug tests our sworn members randomly. This change came about due to community interest and helps build trust. The Police Bureau now releases information around its investigations of uses of deadly force in as rapid a manner as possible in concert with the district attorney, who has the jurisdiction and the responsibility for these cases. We do this again to try to promote transparency and to help build trust. Lastly, also included in our internal efforts are our partnerships, such as the Community and Police Relations Committee and our Equity Leadership Council, who help guide our work and develop our training and recommendations that improve our understanding and our action around equity. The second leg of the stool in the strategy is to diversify the Bureau and diversify the leadership of the Bureau. It's important that we continue to diversify both new folks coming in the Bureau and our leadership in the Bureau. Everybody should be able to look at any level within the Police Bureau and see a culture familiar to them. This helps promote trust externally, and internally it helps us to better make decisions and better decide on policy from this richer knowledge. This area includes our efforts also around recruiting, hiring, and retaining people of color and females. We also need to continue and improve our mentoring and developing efforts and our support of retention efforts, such as those conducted by Noble and Say Hey. We need to be conscious, thoughtful, and inclusive around ensuring everybody has access to developmental assignments. Third leg is that we need to focus on a relationship-based philosophy of policing versus an enforcement-based philosophy of policing. When I got appointed to the Police Bureau, it was the beginning of the height of violent crime in the city of Portland. Gangs and gun crimes in particular were prevalent. The enforcement-based strategies were used to stop the shootings and get guns off the streets. Fast forward 28 years later, and today we're looking at an almost 40-year low in violent crime. The exception to that trend is around continued gang violence in our city and attacks on police officers both here and nationwide. I'm still not convinced that we necessarily have the right amount of resources, the right partners, the structure, and the holistic approach around addressing the complex problem of continued gang violence. I think that's an area that we as a city really need to continue to look at and put resources towards. Violence against the police is a trend both here and nationwide. Last year, we had 2 officers shot in separate incidents and a police canine killed. Last week, one of our officers had to use deadly force to protect himself, and Tuesday night, one of our officers was shot at multiple times by a suspect who ultimately killed himself. Community expectation during our height of gun violence in the 80s were clear and specific. Stop our children from shooting each other and stop the rampant crack cocaine drug dealing. Those enforcement-based strategies that we had at the time arguably were effective for reducing gun violence. and saving lives, but those strategies today may reduce legitimacy for the profession and reduce community trust, and are not the most effective ways to police in this era. I'm going to kind of give you an example between the two different philosophies. If you look at, say, a complaint of drug dealing, when you look back at the traditional enforcement-based model, an officer would get this complaint, probably get a couple other officers and go dutifully try to address this. Probably start stopping a lot of people anytime they saw a violation of anything in the vehicle code or criminal code, make that pretext stop, try to get a search, and ultimately at some point would probably find the drugs that were being complained about, but at the cost of stopping a whole bunch of people that had nothing to do with that. If you take that same challenge and look at it from a relationship-based philosophy, and that takes a direction from the top and a focus, look at that and you get that same complaint. That officer goes out to that intersection, they park their car, they get out, they go talk to the business owners there, they talk to the homeowners, they get accurate information on what is going on, and then when they're doing their enforcement efforts, it's based on that information from communicating with folks, and they're not stopping everyone in the world, and they're building trust because the people they're talking to who live there and are concerned about that, they know why they're out there. One of the things I know is I can't sit in my office and say, work on this priority first, this crime next, this livability next, and have that be effective and work for everybody. The needs of the downtown community are very different than the needs of the community at Coley and Killingsworth, very different from the needs of the community at 162nd and Burnside. But what I can do that works is direct our members to build trusting relationships in all parts of the community, not just most of the community, not just some of the community, and have them work on community priorities together to build safer and healthier neighborhoods. One of my priorities as chief is to be out in the community, talking to people, and more importantly, listening to people. I can't lead the city's public safety efforts from downtown. I have pledged to be out and about as much as I can, and I've also asked my senior leadership team, my assistant chiefs, commanders, captains, and others to focus their efforts and the efforts of those that they supervise on community engagement and relationship building as well. You have already seen, and you will continue to see, myself and Bureau senior leadership out in the community. We are leaning into the hard conversations, not avoiding them, and learning how we can better serve our community. I want to give you an example of the kind of relationship-based approach that I'm talking about. Last year, North Precinct began a collaborative partnership in the Coley and Killingsworth area. Before beginning their work out there, one of the lieutenants that was in charge of this structured some listening sessions. And these were for all of the officers and sergeants who were going to be working out on the issues that were being complained about out there. He had people from the community come in and talk to these officers and supervisors about their historical concerns with police. He ensured that all the officers and sergeants who were working in this community were there to listen and to listen non-defensively. This allowed both healing by the presenters and better understanding by the officers and the sergeants of how they could better help this part of the community that they serve. They then prioritized their work around the community's desires, which included some drug dealing locations and traffic issues. They continued with community meetings, discussions, and walking beats. The Police Bureau has a lot of work to do ahead of us. To help us achieve our goals, upon taking office and with the support of the mayor, I restructured the Police Bureau and conducted several promotions and significant personnel movement. The Bureau now has 4 branches instead of 3 to better allow capacity for more community engagement by senior leadership and to ensure the successful completion of all parts of the Department of Justice settlement agreement. The Department of Justice agreement has many points in it around force, de-escalation, policy work, working with people in crisis, and community engagement. With the Department of Justice agreement, we have significant changes and benchmarks that we need to target correctly and on time. We have a new compliance officer and community liaison position, and the city and community have just selected a community outreach advisory board, a group of citizens chosen from an application pool who will monitor all of our reforms, make recommendations to us, and let us know when we have achieved compliance. I was a part of all the Department of Justice negotiations, and I fully support the four corners of that document. I believe that the successful completion of this agreement will be another step for us in further achieving trust with all parts of the community we serve. There are also significant and exciting changes in both the juvenile justice system and the adult criminal justice system coming. Juvenile justice system will begin to better model itself much like the healthcare system. Its focus will be trauma-informed and on prevention and healing, not incarceration. With the passage of Senate Bill 3194 last year, the adult system will stop continuing to build prisons and refocus those funds on treatment and supervision. These changes should reduce the number of people being incarcerated. The Portland Police Bureau also formed the Youth Services Division with a very different mission. Their mission is to keep kids safe, keep them out of the criminal justice system, and to help them graduate. This is a very non-traditional mission for a law enforcement agency. We've made significant changes in the last few years in force policy and taser use. We've made significant changes in how and when we respond to people in behavioral health crisis. We've had substantial changes in how and where we train. We have significant community involvement in our discipline process and in our policy development. Community advisory boards make recommendations to our training division, our precincts, our chief's office, and to our behavioral health unit. We have massive technology changes. We have a new city system for purchasing and for payroll. We have a new regional records management system going live this April. It will have approximately 44 partner law enforcement agencies adding and receiving information from it to better address regional crime trends. That's more than double the number of partners in the current system that we have. Other technologies include things like the automatic license plate reader, photo and red light cameras, and vehicle and on-body camera technologies. These technologies require thoughtful community input around policy to ensure that they build trust and not reduce it. Can the Portland Police Bureau really change? The Portland Police Bureau has changed more in the last few years than the prior 100. This will continue through the next several years as we continue to develop to meet community expectations in an ever-increasing challenging environment. There's no finish line to change. I'm very proud of the work we have done and continue to do around force investigations, equity, diversity, and community involvement and engagement. A diverse, well-trained, educated workforce working together on community priorities is our path to continue to build trust in our community, as well as to meet the public safety needs that each part of our community needs. Know that I am very proud of the Portland Police Bureau. Every week, our members risk their safety, they save lives, and they protect and serve our community. They've dedicated their lives to community service, and I'm very proud of them. They've responded incredibly to the tremendous amount of institutional change that we are undergoing. Know that I am committed to serving all parts of our community. My actions match my words. You've seen that from my consistent messaging from the top, my leadership appointments, my visibility and participation in the community, and even in my calling out of other chiefs when they miss the mark. I'm honored to be the chief of police of an organization that is filled with people who do great work every day and are committed to providing exceptional public service. I'm confident in the path that we have charted. I'm excited about the future and ask for all of you to be alongside us, work with us, continue to challenge us to do our best, and help us make a difference. I believe this is a defining moment for our community. We are beginning a new chapter in the Portland Police Bureau. We have the support and share a vision with Mayor Charlie Hales of a different Portland where equity and trust are words that will be used regularly to describe all parts of city government. It is important to me that we have our police bureau at the front of the line in this transformational work. Thank you.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Just a reminder, if you do have a question, please make sure to write it on your index card and hold it up high so that the folks from the City Club can grab them and make sure they get to me when we open up the portion for Q&A. Hello, my name is Salome Chimuku. I'm the Public Policy Director at the Center for Intercultural Organizing. And so now we're going to transition into a Q&A session between us here on the panel, and then later open it up for folks on the floor who have questions. So I'm going to ask my fellow panelists if anyone has a question to start us off.
Sure. As I listened to what the chief shared with us, I guess if I was new to Portland, I would get really excited about it. The fact that I've been here all of my life and been on the front lines of a lot of the issues that the chief talked about for the past 35 years, it's almost like I sit here and feel like, man, I've been to this movie before, and I haven't quite liked how the movie ended. So I guess my first question, Chief, would be that as you look at the things that you've outlined, I kind of look at this the same way I look at a school district where you have a superintendent who tries to set the tone for the district. They pass the message down to the folks that report to them, who pass it down to a principal, but ultimately it gets down to the teacher in the classroom who has direct access to a kid. And in this case, your message is going to get passed down through a number of folks. And the question is, how do you maintain a culture that goes from you all the way down to that police officer who's going to stop the kid on the street and be able to carry out this information that you brought forward? Because for me, it seems like it's mind and then it's the heart. And everything that you talk about that we learn in our minds that is correct, the whole concept of equity and diversity, et cetera, sounds so wonderful until I'm in the heat of the moment, and then I begin to do what's in my heart. And if my heart isn't in total alignment with my mind, I'm going to forget all of the training. I'm going to do what I do based on the lens that I look out of. So really, I'm looking for the accountability, and how do you take a message from the top and get that all the way down to the street with the cop on the street?
Thank you for that question. I think that's a very valid, very fair question and concern. I think you do that in a couple of different ways. I think it starts by going back to making sure that as a chief, the leadership team that you put in place all support the goals and vision and direction that you're going. That's why my conversation with the mayor initially was, to do the work that I want to do, I need to make substantial change. I need to restructure the Bureau, and I need to make a lot of movements so that I know starting out, I've got the right people at the top. So when I am putting my message out, it is not just coming down through one or two supporters, but my entire leadership team. And so it's important that that message starts and continues from the top and is pushed down and not filtered, not funneled, but amplified as it goes down. And then it's a matter of how you prioritize, how you make things important. When you're, for instance, in our evaluations, when we did our first round of drafting these evaluations, you need to put in the things that you're looking for. Community engagement, how you're treating people. Because if you're not measuring it, you shouldn't be surprised if you don't see it. And so looking at all of your processes and making sure that you're reinforcing that message, that's continuing. Most recently, we had a lieutenant's examination, and a huge part of that process and in the decision-making on who we will promote will be based on, do these candidates have the ability and the demonstrated history to carry out community engagement, to advance our equity goals, to improve our communication?
As you know, I'm one of the biggest critics of Portland Police Bureau, but also one of the first people to tell you when you do something right. And so for me, my first question is, the use of military weapons and tactics in Ferguson shocked the nation. Since then, Portland Police Bureau has escalated their use, now employing flashbang grenades and sonic weapons. Do you have any plans to demilitarize the force? And if so, how will you make that happen? Oh, I have another part. Thank you. I hear clapping. And while you send those weapons, those graded tear gas, bomb-proof vehicles back to the military that is giving them to police departments to use in local communities?
Thank you, and that's a question that we have heard in the profession nationwide in the last few months and year. The Portland Police Bureau's vehicle, we have no military vehicles. Our vehicles are police specific. They are made particularly for police tactical operations. The gear that you see available sometimes during major protests, that protective safety gear, is not military gear. So we don't use that. We have that because at times during these incidents, and what we've experienced in some of the last ones, were our officers taking rocks and bottles, and that can hurt, kill, and cripple folks. So a part of that is having folks available for when that situation turns like that, so that we're not putting our officers in danger like that. I think historically, if you look at how the police manage free speech events, we have continued to improve, dramatically over the years, and I think that improvement really started back in probably about 2004 under then Commander Sizer, and she really changed the way our approach was in managing major events like that. Really reinforced for us one of our major responsibilities is upholding the right to peaceably assemble. And as we have continued, we have developed specially trained crowd control incident commanders that are understanding of all of the resources available. We have a huge increase in the number of bicycle officers that we use in these events. And the leaders, the persons in charge of these events, know that even showing people in protective gear is an escalation, and are thoughtful about when and how or if that should happen.
What about the tear gas? I noticed that you now have these huge canisters, and depending upon what officer has those huge canisters, depends on how they're deployed. I mean, and I've seen them deployed on First Unitarian church members who were peacefully protesting. And so I do think that the model needs to be relooked at, refigured, and that, I mean, those chemicals have a real impact on people. So the question is whether or not that's an appropriate use of force by police on people who are peacefully protesting.
The canisters that you see are the same pepper spray that all officers carry. They're merely a larger canister for potential use in events like that. The use of that is governed by our critical incident, our crowd control incident commanders for when that may be appropriate or not. The crowd control incident commanders meet quarterly with all of the support units that are a part of managing free speech events. And they constantly critique past events, talk about best practices, review things, have discussions, have debriefings in that attempt to continue to do our best job. And certainly I've communicated with our folks what a priority for us that it is to, one of our most important responsibilities is supporting peaceable free speech and free events like that.
So I have a question. So when speaking about accountability earlier, my question to you would be, what steps are you taking to make sure that the measures in which you place don't fade once you are no longer chief of police? And I say this because oftentimes we see that even when you have someone who is a shining example of what standards we want to hold, it oftentimes happens in police bureaus that people move on, they do other things. And so I'm wondering, in terms of legislation and other city ordinances, what are you doing to make sure that the pieces that you want to instill in accountability are staying around after you have left?
Boy, that's a great question. I think there's a couple pieces to that. Because what you're really wanting to do is institutionalize your value and your directions that will go past personalities being in different places. And so sort of twofold with that. I talked earlier about having our equity and diversity program manager, and that we're building an equity and diversity strategic plan. That is a position and a plan that will survive personalities. And the goal there to help be able to change all of our SOPs, all of our practices in each of our divisions. The second piece, and I think the bigger, longer term piece, is the people that you have in place. The changes that I made were pretty substantial, and so I've been able to put in a huge amount of our senior leadership team and put people in place that I know share my values and direction of this. And I think that's another piece that will help carry on when I'm not chief. You've got a whole nother level of leadership who share this vision and direction.
So a comment and then a question. As we talk about becoming familiar and comfortable, I would say that in our world in Self-Enhancement Inc., we have had relationships with the police force. You've come in and done a number of classes with our students in hopes that you would become more comfortable and more familiar with our black students, so that when you see them out in the streets, that you will remember that everybody that does have a hood on is not necessarily a gang member. So I think as often as you could do those kinds of things with your officers, I think that would be a tremendous help. As you outline your program in a very general sense, I would ask the question about specifically the targeting and services and how you would approach black boys and black men. When we look at the data, there is a proliferation of negativity that's happening in that specific area, and not to minimize any other folks that are under siege or potentially under siege from the police department. I would like to know, is there anything very specific that you have lined up with regards to the interactions with black boys and black men?
Yeah, I think some of the things that the Police Bureau is doing around engaging our youth of color like that involve a lot of work that our Youth Services Division does. When the Police Athletic League failed financially a couple years ago, the Police Bureau took on an intentional project to continue a summer camp that is staffed by many Bureau volunteers to help with that work, to help continue that. Our Youth Services Division, with that non-traditional law enforcement role, does things like intentional bike fairs in communities of color and brings other officers from other precincts to help have different and shared experiences in that world.
One thing I wanted to say, you did mention that now Portland police officers have an annual evaluation. That is absolutely credited to community members who hounded the Police Bureau for well over a decade, knowing that any organization that has 1,000 employees and doesn't do an annual evaluation is ludicrous. And so it took us well over a decade to get the evaluations in place. The same with the drug testing. It took us well over a decade of consistently going to the Portland, union negotiation talks to make sure that these issues, and for us, the community, those were like no-brainers, right? The fact that it took over a decade to make both of those things happen, I think is important for our City Club audience to know. Having said that, my next question has to do with what protections are you offering men and women in uniform who would like to be whistleblowers, who would like to tell us what's really going on internally within the Bureau? And I ask that question because of what happened to Lindsay Hunt. Lindsay Hunt was driven out of the Portland Police Bureau. When she sued the Police Bureau, there was a psychologist hired to say basically she was crazy because she didn't think that a police officer going in and not paying for items at a convenience store was appropriate. And when she challenged her supervisor, all of a sudden she wasn't worthy to be a Portland police officer. And so my question again is, what are you doing to ensure that if we have brave men and women in blue who are willing to tell it like it really is, how are you going to ensure that you protect them in their career moving forward?
I think there's probably a whole lot more to that particular case that you mentioned that is not appropriate for me to get into in this venue. But I think that there are several protections that we now have. The Police Bureau now doesn't just do its own investigations on misconduct. That is all overseen by independent police review. So any Bureau employee has the ability to file a complaint, make a complaint completely outside of the Bureau to be investigated by the independent police review.
So when speaking to diversifying your force, I'd just like to make a comment and saying, honestly, the idea that you have folks that may look like me in the force doesn't necessarily mean that there's folks who do not still have a bias. And I say this because, as we know, Portland has a huge emerging immigrant population and community. And oftentimes, what we don't understand is people have intersectionalities within their own identities. And just because a law enforcement agent may be of Asian American descent doesn't necessarily mean they do not have bias against an African American or do not have bias against folks who they perceive to be undocumented. And so I say this in asking a question of what are you doing to put rules in place so that folks who have complaints against them about their professionalism while on the field are not only kept to see the retention of complaints and how many one has gotten over time, but to also safeguard against escalation for where we see cases in which we have an incident of excessive use of force and go back and realize that this particular officer has had many complaints about their engagement in profiling and that this whole situation could have been curbed had then folks been watching for a systemic pattern and trend instead of individual cases.
Yeah, I agree with you that a diverse bureau does not equal an equitable bureau, but that is a critical step to have. The next piece of that, though, is the ongoing training that I've talked about, that we're going to be, we have begun from the top down and working with our line employees now. And hand in hand with that is our strategic plan around equity moving forward. Just because somebody's diverse doesn't mean that they are treating people fairly and equitably out in the field. And so that ongoing education is critical to help prevent the behavior that you're talking about.
And then I guess to follow that up, but what are we doing to make sure that our system in which here in the city of Portland is looking for those systemic trends and patterns instead of looking at the individual cases that we've been doing so far?
Yeah, the other piece that I think addresses what you're talking about there is our hiring of a stops data analyst that is going to look at all of our stops data and drill down into that.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of things that we could point out, and at some point you got to get to, what are the real solutions? And I don't know whether what you've outlined will ultimately be solutions to our challenges or not. But to me, this will ultimately come down to what's in an individual officer's heart. I know at SEI, we tend to say that we put our last name on every kid. So every child that comes into our program, we treat them like they are our own. I just wonder what it would be like for an officer every time he's looking at a potential individual, puts their own name on that individual, and would it change the way in which they react to that individual? I suffice to say that it probably would, but that can't happen unless we have more experiences than what we're having now. I think you almost have to mandate that your officers get into a community and spend time with individuals in that community so they could become extremely familiar, and not by happenstance, but by a part of what is mandated for them to do. It is much more difficult to shoot your son or shoot your daughter or shoot your niece or your nephew, but in many cases, I don't think that many of your officers are looking at people that they even think about that concept of a relationship. So, this is not a question, but it's just a point of reference going forward, that if we're looking for solutions, the solutions to me are wrapped up in risk plus experience equals trust. And there is no trust because we're not risking together, we're not experiencing together, it's us versus you. And we have to change that mentality if we are really looking for solutions.
Before folks respond, just a quick announcement. It is 1 o'clock, and so we are opening this up for folks who have members that have questions to please approach the mic. And for those who are non-members, please make sure that you write your question on an index card and hold it up high so our folks can grab them from you. And I'll make sure to answer it, or at least ask one of the index card questions before we wrap up here in the next 15 minutes.
Okay, so if I could, I can do my last one.
Do I get an answer?
Oh, I'm sorry. He didn't actually ask the question, so I wanted to squeeze my question in.
Go for it.
Okay, my question has to do with last year, Multnomah County Gang Assessment Report defined a gang member as 2 or more people who self-identify. So if I look out in this room, there could possibly be about 100 gangs operating within this room. Because of the very poorly defined definition of gang member, community kids are forced into a position of proving they're not a gang member versus they are. What are you going to do as police chief to ensure that kids that are black, brown, or any other color can walk through their own neighborhoods and feel confident that they will not be harassed, intimidated, or labeled based on the color of their skin or the manner of dress?
Well, I can't speak for the county's definition on what a gang member is, but what I can speak to is when we can still fill a park with mothers who've lost their sons from gang violence, we still have an issue that we need to deal with. And you heard me talk in my speech that I'm not convinced that as a community, as a city, that we have all the pieces together that we need to around gang violence, because quite frankly, I don't think that we do. Law enforcement is one piece of that, community is another piece of that, and so I think there's a lot of work for us to do around that to come together in that.
And then I'll just ask one more quick question before we go over to the mic.
Can't hear you.
So we're going to turn it to, well, it doesn't work. Community policing. Thank you for sharing your mic. I will ask one more quick question, and then we'll turn to the folks over at the mic. And so the last question I have for you is that speaking to the diversity of Portland, what are law enforcement doing in terms of rules that they're acting in place to better, work with the diversity within Portland? And I mean that in the terms of what are they doing specifically to identify folks in the community and get them to these many committees that you spoke of before, understand that there's an application process that might bar folks from participating who could be a real service and value.
One of the things that's very important to me is that we reach all parts of our community. A couple years ago, we realized that we had very little connection with the Slavic community. So we reached out and asked for connections there, started making connections, and ultimately built a relationship with that community. There was no barriers to that application process. The goal was to come together and ask the question, how can police best serve this growing community? And so you've heard me talk about my number one focus is building those trusting relationships in all parts of our community. It goes back to the point Mr. Hobson had mentioned a little bit ago that I absolutely concur with, that we need to have relationships in all parts of those community, and then we also have to have the education and training around equity and cultural competency to better serve those groups.
Can I, as the final point, just say that the Multnomah County Gang Assessment Report, your boss, the mayor, and the previous police chief actually co-authored that report. So it's not a Multnomah County, it's all law enforcement that operate within Multnomah County who've agreed on that definition of gang member. So I want to make sure the City Club knows that.
My name is Sharon Joy. I am a City Club member. And I was 40 years old and had already learned that emotional stresses paralyzed me because I had MS. When I was arrested, 12 policemen came to my door and charged me with 25 years of prison offenses for selling drugs, although I did not smoke, drink, or take aspirin. And in the process, I was put into a Salem prison for 3 days with convicted prisoners. And there I learned that the emotionally diseased were emotionally tortured to scare them straight, which was similar to him physically torturing me to make me well again. And my question is, can the police even understand that emotional stresses can damage both physical, mental, and emotional health and cause more problems than maybe they started out with?
Yeah, I think there's a couple pieces that I see out of that because emotional stresses affect police officers as well, especially cumulatively over a 25 or 30-year career, and we frequently have training on that as well. So we have an awareness about that and how that impacts us as well.
Hello, my name is Cameron Gustafson, and I'm a David Douglas Civic Scholar. In your speech, you talked about hiring or recruiting a more diverse group of people to the force. How is this recruitment strategy any different than any other attempt to make the force equal representatives of our community? And when do you expect that we will see a substantial diversity in the leadership of the Portland Police Force?
A couple things. You've already seen in the last couple years that the Bureau has been hiring a very diverse workforce. The way the city accounts for numbers, so a lot of times you'll hear, is it double counting or not? I don't like the way that is. But normal math, we are better than 30% racial gender diversity hiring in the workforce. And the gender piece is important, especially in my profession. That is a critical piece. So looking at the numbers with normal math, city math will show you that's about a 41% piece. But I've not cared for that way, but that's the way we are required to track it. You will see that with the appointments that I made, you will see a very diverse and qualified senior leadership team.
And I'll just add that the leadership of Portland Police Bureau is much more diverse than it's been since Charles Moose was police chief in the city of Portland under this new leadership. So that's a good thing.
My name is Rika Gusti, and I'm a civic scholar from David Douglas. At this point, it is easier to buy a gun than to buy my education. What will you do to change gun control regulation in the city of Portland?
There is a flurry of legislative activity down in Salem right now. A significant component of that is legislation around gun control. So it's not, the police don't make the laws, the legislators make the laws, and the police, that is a tool for the police to use, but know that your legislators have seen and heard you on that, and they're working on that.
Hello, my name is Douglas Wilson. I am a civic scholar at David Douglas High School. You were talking about how you were trying to diversify the force for the police, and I was wondering, how are the police officers distributed around the precincts, and do specific ethnicities patrol specific areas?
We don't assign officers based on ethnicity. They officers are free to work wherever they desire. We have a very big city, and the precincts offer different kinds of work, and officers are able to choose over their career, different times, different places, as well as the specialty units. The Bureau has a fair amount of specialty units that people apply for, compete for, to get those positions. But we don't have a process design where if you're a certain ethnicity, you're going to work here or work here or work here.
I would like to also add to that. There is a piece, though, that most of Portland police officers actually don't live within the city limits. And so there is a portion of that wondering, how do we make sure that the folks who are not from the city of Portland, do not reside in the city of Portland, truly know the community in which they're serving if they don't live, shop, and pray there?
I think that's a great question. That conversation has come up a lot. Should there be a requirement for police to live in the city or not? I think that's the wrong question. I think it gets back to Mr. Hobson's point of the people we have working here, you want them connected, engaged, involved, knowing their community. And I think there is a presumption that if you live in the city, you will get that. And I don't think that is necessarily an accurate presumption. You can, there's folks that live in the city that, may live out in deep Southwest, have no contact with, they come to work, they go back home, and you've got people that don't live in the city that spend a substantial amount of their time in the community during their work hours, during their off hours. So I think when we put things out there, whether it's should you live in the city or should you have a college degree, I think it's more important to look at what are you really asking. And I think what you're really asking about that is, how do we get officers to be very engaged and know our community? The college question, how do we get officers who can think critically, who can read, who can write, who can communicate? And I think sometimes we need to be careful about what we presume this might get us, but because it might not.
Hi, I'm Dustin Riggs, City Club member. Do the Portland Police currently are planning to have training to recognize or deal with the mentally ill?
The Portland Police Bureau has undergone substantial training around people with behavioral health issues. That is a significant part of the Department of Justice agreement. We've developed that behavioral health unit that I talked about, where we have mental health experts as a part of the Police Bureau, helping us, training us, responding to calls out there with us. We've done that in every Blue Suit officer has gone through crisis intervention training, and then another 60 who had a desire to do more have gone on and have learned enhanced crisis intervention training to better their skills in that area.
And I wanted to add the Community Oversight Advisory Board, if there are any members here, if they could wave their hands. The Community Oversight Advisory Board is the community arm that will be determining whether or not the settlement agreement is being implemented as intended. And I hope that they will take a look at whether or not this even makes common sense, having police officers doing some assessment on the street about whether or not people need mental health services. Because, I would think that we would want mental health people making those decisions and not people who are trained for something totally different. And I don't know how many hours of behavioral health training officers get, but I'm very concerned that that's out of their lane. They're supposed to be protected and serving, not figuring out what mental health services people need and how to get them to those services. So I hope the COAB will look at that really critically and maybe provide some feedback to the Bureau.
And I very much share that concern. The Bureau hasn't entered into that world because, hey, here's some more work, here's something we want to do. We've entered into that work because we're in a world that has a broken mental health system, and there's been nobody else to go and help. And when 911 gets called, we're the last ones left to go. So I welcome that review and making sure that we are most appropriately in our lane.
So I would like to just ask one of the index card questions, just as promised. And so this question, I think I'll just give a little bit of context. So you spoke earlier about how there are a flurry of bills in the legislature in regards to law enforcement. So this question comes, what will Portland Police do to support efforts in the legislature or give testimony to legislation that they support so that way some of the policies that you spoke of are instilled in statute as opposed to tied to you?
Yeah, the city of Portland has a very robust Office of Government Relations, and their role is to make sure that any bills that require support from any bureau director, not just the police, many apply to other things, they make those connections, they make their role, and connect us with them and say, here's when we need you to be down here to support these different positions. So the city has an office dedicated just to that, and they've been very, very busy. This is their Super Bowl time of year, making those connections, ensuring the right bureau directors are down there testifying on bills.
We've run out of broadcast time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for the day. And as we close, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to Chief Larry O'Day, Salome Chimuku, Joanne Hardesty, and Tony Hobson. We're adjourned.